This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
In today's episode of Rewilding in Action, I find out what's happening with the goal to eradicate possums on the Otago Peninsula now that Predator-Free 2050 funding has wound up, and why it's so important to remove every last possum in order to help the native forest to regenerate. This episode of Rewilding in Action is sponsored by the Opera, Otago Peninsula Eco-Restoration Alliance. The Opera is a private eco-reserve dedicated to conservation, rehabilitation, restoration and education. Find out more about their tours on their website, theopera.co.nz. Kia ora, welcome to Rewilding in Action. I'm Maureen Howard, and today I'm very excited to be in the Otago Access Radio studio because I have Paula Cross, who is Operations Manager for Otago Peninsula Biodiversity Group, and Professor Phil Seddon, who is a reintroduction biologist from the Zoology Department at Otago University. So welcome to the studio, guys.
Thanks, Maureen.
Thank you.
Our interesting goal of today is to talk about the push to eradicate possums from the Otago Peninsula, and we're talking about the Australian brush-tailed possum, to understand the impacts of the possums, but also the differences between an eradication program and a suppression program, and maybe some of the unintended consequences or byproducts of when you actually take a species out of the system, because ecosystems are so complex. So I'm really hoping to get into some really interesting questions today. So briefly, Paula, as the operations manager for Otago Peninsula Biodiversity Group, you've been very involved with the eradication program, and you're kind of getting on the home run now, aren't you?
Very much on the home run. Just a very small handful of possums left that are elusive, but we're pretty much there, and we're pretty confident that we will be there within a few months.
And so what has been happening on the Otago Peninsula? How did you get to this? And what methods did you use to actually eradicate the possums, or nearly eradicate them so far?
Yeah. Sure. So the group started around 15 years ago. I think 2008 was the conceptual time where they started to bring out the concept and create the group. 2009 is when they first started putting traps on the ground. It was a community-driven project, very low employment, one manager across a lot of volunteers, and then they would apply for funding to use contractors. So whenever they got a decent amount of money, a contract would be done in a specific area. So that was the model that was used for quite some time until 2018. And at that point in time, the concept of Predator-Free 2050 initiatives came about. And that trust, the Predator-Free 2050 New Zealand Trust, were looking for projects. And the Otago Peninsula project of possum eradication was one that they engaged with, and so we got a lot of funding for more staff, a lot more equipment, and a 5-year program to actually get the job done. So when you're talking about eradication suppression, the group probably did have that goal, but the timeline wasn't clear because of the resourcing and techniques involved. It's a new territory, especially back then. So yeah, the funding from Predator-Free 2050 was a game changer in a sense that you then had the ability to bring on more resourcing. And the other thing that made this happen was some new technology.
Right. But prior to that, you did a lot of groundwork, didn't you? Like the organisation in terms of getting all those landowners on board. Mm-hmm. That was really, really critical, wasn't it?
100%. You can't do it without the landowners behind you and allowing you to access their property, and even volunteers to help with. There's a certain amount of staffing, but the volunteers are a big part of that as well, and even backyard trapping that people are doing in their own backyards. Yeah, so that was very much an important part of our project.
Yes, because I think people can underestimate that or be in too much of a hurry. And if you fail to bring people along, then it gets really difficult. So congratulations on that alone. Mm-hmm. But so when you say there was this game changer of the new technology, what have been some of the methods that you have used in the beginning and then in this last final race to the end?
Sure. So some of the automation is very helpful. So there is the AT220 trap, which is automatic. So you only have to service that once every 3 months to re-lure it and put new batteries in. So that is definitely helpful. It can't be the only tool because not all possums will go into that trap. If we had one trap they all wanted to go in, then that would be easy. But there are ones that avoid that trap for some reason. But that was a big part of our project. They are expensive traps, but they're worth it in regard to what you can catch with the amount of less labour over big areas. So that was a big one for us. The other one was the Celium network. So that's like a node system that notifies you when a possum's been caught live in a live capture cage, and also a leg hold situation. So those ones for our elusive possums that are not inclined to want to put their head into something, but they're more inclined to want to walk into a cage. But the labour on that is huge because it's daily checks. You can't leave an animal in a cage for longer than 24 hours. But what happens is that when the cage door drops, it alerts us on our phones and our computers so that we can respond to the capture. And so then we can leave a lot of cages open and not have to regularly check them daily. And when I first became involved, I was like, how reliable is this technology? It is incredibly reliable. So that's been a very good thing for us to be able to use that technology.
Because obviously we've also got a lot of animal welfare concerns,
Yes.
And so that's really important and reassuring for you to know that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what's then the number of possums that you've taken out of the system in the peninsula?
Yeah, almost 25,000, around 25,000 now. So, yeah.
It's an incredible number. And do you have an idea what number we're at now? That are left, I mean.
Oh, that are left.
Yes,
that's always a tricky one. Although, actually, I didn't mention the other technology, which is also very good, and that is our trail cameras, which pick up, I mean, it's not new, but it's still one that wasn't there when the group started. So that to be able to monitor what's out there with trail cameras is very, very helpful for knowing that. But again, there's only so much you can have in so many areas and all of that sort of thing. So we've also used drones for cliffs, another good piece of technology. And we've also used scat dogs and dogs for... So if you combine all of those methods, then we get a much clearer idea of what we've got left. So with using those methods, we know between basically half the peninsula from town to Portobello, we can't see any at the moment. There might be one around near Tomahawk, but it's pretty clear. Then we have got some areas out towards Cape Saunders where we know we have got a little few handful tricky ones on cliffs. Yeah, that's all we know of at the moment. So they could pop up. We're always been a bit reluctant to say it's completely clean because we've done that before, gone, this area, this particular area, we think that's clean. And then one pops up on your camera randomly. You're like, where did that come from? And people have asked a lot of questions around that. What happens when you get down to lonely possums? How far do they roam? What we're finding is if it's a male, they can roam a lot. There's a Manaki Whenua research with Osprey that showed it can be up to 60 hectares over a span. So that's why we do get them popping up randomly. And it could even be outside of that if they really are lonely and it's a male wanting to breed. Females don't roam as much. So if we find a female, we know that their range is going to be lower, be easy to catch.
So Phil, firstly, just what is the impact of the possums on the peninsula? And I'm particularly interested from a rewilding perspective, thinking about the impact on natural regeneration within forests, into both flora and fauna.
Sure. Yeah, the understanding of the impact of possums is quite interesting. They first came in about 1880s in Riverton. And for years, no one really believed they had a big impact because they didn't in Australia because of the densities they were at. And it wasn't actually till the 1920s that people went, gosh, these things are making a big difference on our native forests, particularly broadleaf forest, where they're at higher densities than they are in Australia and they don't have competitors. So they talk about them being kind of opportunistic omnivores, really herbivores, but they'll eat other things. So they prefer leaves of certain plants. And the way they browse is they'll actually select a particular tree within a forest. And there's a suggestion that there's something about the content in the leaves of a given tree at a given time that are very attractive to the possums. So rather than sort of selective browsing bits here and there, they could defoliate trees in forests. So they're killing big trees in the forests there. The other impacts they have are obviously They don't only eat leaves, they eat meat as well. So they'll eat native snails, and they'll eat birds in nests and eggs in nests as well. They also exclude other things. When they're nesting, they might be excluding things like seabirds that might be wanting to nest in those same kind of sites. So where you can massively reduce the density of possums, you start to see much better forest regeneration.
Right. So you're even saying, what you're saying is in an established forest, they can bring down a tree. They can also really impact on the bird population and the invertebrate population. But even at the regeneration stage, in terms of a forest trying to get going,
absolutely,
they will impact
they're
it. In what
efficient.
ways would they be impacting at that level?
Well, they're browsing. They're browsing any kind of greenery that's attractive to them. And they're at really high densities. I'm not sure what the density was on the peninsula before the control started there, but they can get up to about 10 per hectare in good conditions. They're lower, and you get into the arid zone in the central area, it's probably less than 1 per hectare. But where conditions are good, they've got no competitors. There's no real predators. Yeah.
So one of the things about the Otago Peninsula that makes it such a fabulous place, apart from the people who are fabulous, is that it is a peninsula and you do have this opportunity for eradication. And so I really wanted to talk about, this goal of eradicating versus suppressing, having to just come in and keep a population low, but actually that opportunity to eradicate. And so how do you think those two different methods, like what are some of the different outcomes of those two approaches?
If you don't eradicate, that population can always build up again unless you keep pressure on. There was some modelling done by a master's student at Otago, Charlotte Patterson, and she was working with Landcare, Manaki Whenua Landcare, adapting a model that they had and looking at reinvasion rates onto the peninsula from urban Dunedin under different scenarios. So if you got rid of them all and then you didn't do any control, or if you got rid of them all and you kept that buffer zone and you controlled it in the town, or if you didn't quite get rid of them all. If you don't get rid of them all and you stop doing things, 15 years, they're back.
At the previous numbers?
Yep.
Wow, okay.
They're right throughout that whole area again. So the best you can do is get rid of every last one on the peninsula and push really hard on that buffer zone and that base of the peninsula and extend that control through urban Dunedin. We have an advantage in that, right next to the base of the peninsula is a high residential area that doesn't have a lot of possums. For sure, they move through those areas. So it's a natural buffer zone, but you've really got to keep that pressure on there. But if you don't get rid of that last one, Paula will know this.
If she's pregnant.
The last pregnant one or the last pair that are somewhere around. Yeah, they'll come back unless you keep that pressure on. So even if you do eradicate, you can't walk away from it. Yeah, this is a long-term adventure. Yeah.
Apart from, you're saying suppression means that you have to keep at it all the time. What are the other impacts of suppression? What does it do to the population that is there, that is managing to evade traps, becoming smarter?
Yeah, no, that's
more
always
wary.
The challenge. And,
Yeah.
and again, Paula can speak to this as you get what they call recalcitrant possums. You just don't see them. They don't show up in traps. They can avoid cameras, it seems, sometimes. They live in really inaccessible areas, or even accessible areas, and you just can't get at them. We were doing a tracking study of possums. We had these expensive GPS collars on them, and one of them just went bush in St Clair, and we could not get it. $1,200 satellite collar was in the bush somewhere. It was dogs, anything, couldn't get it.
Wow.
We knew exactly where it was because it had a tag on it.
Wow, that's amazing. It is amazing. Yes, so there is a selection. It can become a really, I guess, a very strong selection pressure if you're using a suppression model. But if you do have this opportunity to eliminate, then that is the way to go. And I think it fits much better with the rewilding perspective, where we're wanting to make an intervention and then let nature lead the way. But it's more of a management model, I guess, with the suppression model, where you're having to keep at it every year. But even, your intervention could be 20, 30 years, But if you are actually coming to an end goal, that's the difference.
Yes, and I think too that, where is that end goal? We are in new territory because we're a mainland. They have had eradication projects on islands and, it's an island. So once you're done, you feel like you're done. With the mainland, what Phil was saying, always a case of reinvasion. You always have to work on it. You can't just walk away. I think the way we can manage that, though, is to move into next species, which is what the Otago Peninsula Biodiversity Group are looking at now. Our slogan, whatever you want to call that, is to have a pest-free peninsula. So that is our very long-term goal. But that could take 50 years. It could take 100 years. We haven't got a timeline because it's very difficult to put a timeline into something like eradicating all pest species on a peninsula. However, as we're learning and as technology comes about, we can start to become a little bit more like, that could be possible in 10 years, if you know what I mean. So at the moment when we're looking at new species, we're going about it very carefully because of keeping it, that if you take one out, it's going to impact more towards something else. And then we want to make sure we don't impact something like the hoiho or our native species that will have an impact if we take one pest species out. So we're wanting to do multi-species across them all, but that can still be possum. So when we have our traps and our trail cameras and everything else for all the other species work that we're going to do, of course, when we see a possum, we're going to respond to that. So there's going to be no walk away because we're going to keep working in the bush areas we have. The other beauty of the Otago Peninsula, I guess, is that it's 10% native bush. So there's only certain areas where the possums are going to be, and we know where the hotspots are, that they will always want to come back to if you have a possum that's loose. So there's things like that make it possible.
Right, yes. Although, of course, with rewilding, we shall be increasing that 10%.
Yes.
Yes,
Absolutely. And that is happening. It is increasing.
Yeah, the other thing too is that when you feel you've eradicated, you still need to monitor because you never know who's going to come through. So you can't just kind of walk away entirely.
Yeah. But I guess more I was feeling that with the management of the suppressing of population, you're changing the dynamics, or you're changing the selection pressure on that population, whereas monitoring is a bit different.
You're just looking for animals that show up. Yeah.
So you kind of touched on it briefly, Paula, but some of the impacts or the unintended consequences of removing a species and how it can have a knock-on effect perhaps on other parts of the ecosystem. And so I really would love to talk about that because I was with Moira Parker in the last episode. We talked about the rabbits and how they'd cleared little spaces, which actually allowed totara to come up, and how they actually were helping to keep down a lot of the weed species that have popped up since she's greatly suppressed them on their property. So what are some of the impacts that you might see with possums, Phil, if they're removed?
I think it's all good in that the way they browse doesn't replace something that used to be here as a native species. So they are just an impact. I think we can view them like that, with an ongoing impact on birds and things like that.
Yes.
So I don't think we're going to see a sort of a major collapse or shift just by taking possums out of that system. I think we are seeing regeneration and hearing more birds and all those good things that we're after.
Now, because on Little Barrier Island, they found that when they took out the possums, that the ship rats increased.
There have been some studies around that, and the evidence is not super clear. There was some more Manaki whenua work showing that in some cases there was no response by rats.
Have you noticed any changes, Paula, like in terms of the rat population?
Yeah, it's difficult to say because, we did do some monitoring for rats as a Manaki whenua project. How long ago was that? I think it was about 8 years ago, and it was inconclusive as to whether it was having an impact. Now that we've actually taken a lot more out since then, yes, there are a lot of rats around, but there's also a lot of food source because of the type of weather we're having. So that's where it can be inconclusive. We know that rats and mice, when you have a lot more grass seed and that sort of thing, well, we've got a lot more people fencing off native. There's a lot more grass seed around. I know that because I'm working in these bush areas. So is it the possums? The fact that the rats have more food that they were eating, which was the berries and things like that, might increase their food source, but also the increased grass seed for not the possums impacting that, something else. Do you see what I mean? So it's complicated. I wouldn't put it down just to the possum.
Yeah, it's hard to partition out the different things that are going on. You really need to have a whole lot of Otago peninsulas and you treat them all slightly differently and see what happens.
Yes, if only.
We are wanting to go across multi-species, but rats and mice is definitely one of our key focus ones. So we're going to, as we're getting some more funding, which we're applying for at the moment, backyard trapping for rats, which is the community are very, very supportive of OPPG and what we're doing. And so even at the moment, without a lot of resourcing, because we're a bit low on that at this present time. They're doing it themselves anyway. So I've been putting out surveys to see how many people are actually trapping rats themselves, and a lot of people are doing it off their own back. So that's great. I think and as soon as they think that that's a problem, there's a response from the community to get in and stuck in and trap their rats in their own backyards and things like that. So that's all going to help.
Yeah. So yes, I'm not saying that it shouldn't happen for that reason, but I was just interested to see if you...
Yeah. But you've got to think about composts and rubbish and things like that the rats like as well. So things are changing all the time. And the weather, as Paula said, yeah.
This is true.
But I think, generally we tend to try and think about integrated pest management and understand those relationships. So if you just focus on one, and the classic is if you're just taking, stoats out of forests or something like that, you still have a rat problem. Maybe you have more of a rat problem. You take rats out, maybe we have more of a mouse problem. I'm not sure.
They say that you do have to be careful with those balances between rats, mice, stoats to get that right.
The system,
it's a seasonal thing. The rat numbers will bounce up and down depending on what the climate's doing and the conditions. I think it's very hard to just say there's a very clear relationship with possums.
Yeah. So on a lighter note, Paula, so how many years have you been in the job, and what have been some of the fun things of it?
I've been working for OPG for 4 years now. The fun part is I just enjoy working with the community. I really did enjoy the eradication goal and having something that was big and exciting, and especially I actually enjoy chasing the last possums. It's hard, but it's so rewarding when you get them. I think now also seeing the benefits, and the community mention that a lot to me. They say, the birds in our backyard now are amazing. We've got tuis, we've got bowerbirds, we've got so many birds now. So that's been really rewarding as part of the job, and I feel very fortunate to have been involved in an eradication project.
Yeah. So it's really awesome. As you say, as you've come further to the end, you can really see the benefits already. Yeah. And I guess that it is getting more challenging, though, to get to those last few possums, isn't it?
But we've also got another team working with us now from Halo, from the other side, so we've got some better resourcing there. And that means that OPG can move on to the next species, because what's difficult is how much time you spend on the last one and then you don't do anything with rats and stoats. And the community were wanting, and rabbits particularly actually, we were getting a bit of pressure about that. Well, can you do something about this? This is more of a problem than possums, because that's what they were seeing now. They were seeing possums as not being a problem. They haven't. So the type of comments I get is, I haven't seen a possum for 10 years, but rabbits, they're a real problem. They're destroying my garden. So it's been great that we've been able to hand over some of the work to another team to come in with resources like the dogs and the drones, and better resourcing that way to get those last possums. And we can now go back to the community project, which OPPG are good at, which is working with the community to start on the new species. That's been...
That is exciting.
Can I ask Paula a question?
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
Do you think you get kind of community fatigue around these things? You kind of go, gosh, we've been doing this possum thing for a while. Now you're asking us to do this, and now you're asking us to do that. Or are they kind of encouraged and feel it's kind of incremental gains, and they're seeing these differences that are sustaining that enthusiasm?
I think it depends on the person. I was told this by somebody once within their community, and I thought, ours is probably similar. So it's basically into thirds. So you have a third that are very passionate people that are happy just to keep going. They see the benefits. They are that minded, and there are volunteers that go out and do trap lines, and they're regular and all of that. And the backyard people that are happy to just keep setting their traps. Then you have another third that are okay with us being there. They're happy. They support us. They might make a donation. They're still happy with what we're doing. They buy our calendars. But they might have been a little bit fatigued now, like you say, and a bit ho-hum about it. And then, you get another third that they're not opposed. Well, probably a 1% of that third have said no, because we've only had 1 or 2 landowners. And now we've actually they've come around, so it's probably a 0% now. But you just don't hear from them. They will say yes if they're approached, but... Yeah, so you have different people with different perspectives. But the fatigue thing, I think, even the staff... We did get fatigued on possums. There's no doubt about that. So, like I say, that's another benefit from having a fresh group come in, and then we can start a new species, which is a new focus. And we are getting good support for rabbits, in particular, where people see that as being a big problem. So,
Interesting. That's great. And any advice then to help with another community group who are listening and thinking, ooh, this could be something that we could do, what should they be thinking of first?
I think just what you said at the beginning about getting your community behind you, and so community surveys, community meetings, to find out, how many people, maybe the third's not right, maybe you've got 100% of your community that are hugely passionate, and so then you're going to have great success. But either way, it doesn't matter. You can still, I wouldn't stop a project because of one or two comments or anything like that. Majority of people will support you. They see the outcomes are good. And there's not many people that actually like possums all that much. There's the odd few. But they see that the benefits of not having possums outweighs. Just start with your community, see how many volunteers you can get going, and then start to look for some funding to support that.
Thanks to Professor Phil Seddon and to Paula Cross for coming on the programme. They really brought home to me the whole raft of methods that are needed to remove a species effectively and humanely without causing too many knock-on effects to the forest ecosystem. And thank you for listening to Rewilding in Action. I'm Maureen Howard, and in a fortnight's time I'm back in the ORFM studio to talk with conservation biologist Dr. Daria Aristova, who for her PhD studied the impacts of feeding birds here in New Zealand. With the spectre of bird flu hovering offshore, listen in to find out what we can do and why this is a rewilding topic. So until next time, courtesy of the Department of Conservation, I will leave you with the sounds of tui, a favourite Otago Peninsula bird of my guests, Paula Cross and Phil Seddon, rewilders who are letting nature take the lead.
This podcast was produced by ORFM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.